Welcome to Together Today for Tomorrow, WM's virtual series that highlights the voices of today's leaders who are working for a sustainable tomorrow. So we're thrilled to speak with TT4T's next changemaker, Karen Washington, a true visionary when it comes to the creative use of land. As a passionate gardener and board member of the New York Botanical Gardens, Karen works with Bronx neighborhoods to turn empty lots into community gardens. As former president of the NYC Community Garden Coalition, Karen continues to advocate for garden protection and preservation. And as co-founder of the La Familia Verde Garden Coalition, Karen helps bring fresh vegetables to the Bronx community. Hi, I'm Adrienne Fores, Community Relations and Environmental Education Manager at WM, here to host our second episode of Together Today for Tomorrow. And I couldn't be more thrilled to speak with our guest, Karen Washington.
Hi, my name is Karen Washington, and welcome to the Garden of Happiness. I tell people if they weren't happy when they came in, by the time they leave, they're going to be happy. So this garden was created back in 1988. Can you imagine one time New York City had over 15,000 vacant lots, mostly in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color. And so it's about beautification, it's about having a safe space for both seniors and children. And we grow a variety of different types of fruits and vegetables and herbs. Right now we have about 26 members. We have 26 boxes. Each box is owned by either an individual or a family. We also have a high tunnel. In a high tunnel we grow our seasonal plants like tomatoes and eggplants and peppers. And most of the time the gardeners really come during the weekends and in the evening, and they do a big cookout and bring all their family and friends, and it is a place of joy and laughter. And hopefully, we can continue to have these community gardens. They're up against a lot of development. And we know how important green space is, especially in marginalized community, because they bring a fresh atmosphere, they bring joy, and they bring a sense of community, which is really, really important. During COVID, these community gardens stepped up to the plate to grow food to feed their communities, and they will continue to do just so. So, welcome to my house, Mi Casa Su Casa, the Garden of Happiness.
Karen, you have done and continue to do so many things when it comes to gardening in your community, from co-founding Black Urban Growers to being a board member of Farm School NYC to co-owning Rise and Root Farm. When people ask, what do you do for a living? What's your answer?
Oh, I try to keep it plain and simple. I tell people I'm a farmer, I grow food, I feed people body and mind. But I tell people I'm just an ordinary person trying to do extraordinary things, trying to make a difference within my community.
That's fantastic. And how did you come to this work?
People ask me, how did I become a farmer? A question I'm asked all the time. And I tell people, well, my parents weren't farmers, my grandparents weren't farmers. I got into growing food from having a backyard. I had a big backyard, and I decided to grow three things: collard greens, eggplant, and tomatoes. I wanted to grow collard greens because it was part of my family history and tradition. I wanted to grow eggplant because it sounded funky, and it was a tomato that changed my world. My reference to fruits and vegetables is that they always came from a grocery store. So when I grew my first tomato, first of all, it was red. What? Red? It grew on a vine, and it tasted delicious. And I was hooked, and I wanted to grow everything. Then I get involved in community garden work because across the street was an empty lot. And I got involved in growing food on an empty lot, turning that into a community garden. And I really got the bug to grow food on a small scale. However, in 2008, I had a chance to learn how to grow organically on a larger scale. So I went out to California to a program called CASFIS, the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food System in Santa Cruz. And once I got there, I was somewhat afraid, so to speak. And I say that because all of a sudden the negativity that I heard about farming as related to being a black person and slave work, all of a sudden I said to myself, I felt I didn't belong. And what I had to do was two things: Karen, either get back on a plane and go back home to New York, or fess up to your fears. And what I actually did was I went up to the soil, put my hands in the soil, and instantly felt that connection of belonging. And ever since I felt that connection of belonging, I've been farming ever since. And then I realized while I was in this garden, I started to hear a lot of social issues. And so for me, all of a sudden, it just wasn't about food, but listening to how people are talking about diet-related diseases, having asthma, having the inability to afford affordable housing, medical insurance, and then right then and there, I knew at the center of me concentrating on food that it intersected the environment, health, education, housing, all these sectors, and I really got involved in the social issues that were happening within my garden.
And you've obviously had a lot of success across a host of initiatives. How do you successfully engage people to create this change?
Well, I always tell people outreach is not engagement and it's really meeting people where they are, inviting them to sit down and talk to them. And I think the best quality is to listen what people have to say and enjoy their objectives of what they have to say. And then also you can get your opinions and just sit down and engage in conversation. But what I really find that's really, really critical when you want to do that is to provide food.
Well, you've talked about food as a common denominator. Can you explain that a little bit for us?
Food is that common denominator that bridges across all social areas. And I always felt that to sort of ease the tension of groups or to make people feel comfortable is to sit down and break bread. And food is at the heart of it. And so when people ask me, well, how do you get people in the garden? Or how do you get people at a meeting? Or how do you get people to listen? Invite them to sit at the table and cook some good food and share a meal. That always works.
Yeah, definitely does. I know I love making food together with others. So I'm really interested to know how you actually have been able to cooperate with other organizations and groups and what you've done with those groups. And maybe you could share a couple examples.
Yeah, so for instance, a lot of is social issues. When we first um, got here in the Bronx and in a lot of communities of color, we had so many empty lots. And so people got together to turn these empty lots into community gardens. We all shared an issue. We were living in blight. These were empty lots that the city wasn't taking care of. And so we got together and formed coalitions. Coalitions that I helped form was the New York City Community Garden Coalition, which is an advocacy group to help preserve and protect community gardens. And the next group that is really dear to me is La Familia Verde Community Garden Coalition here in the Bronx, having gardeners in the Bronx come together to be a force to be reckoned with when it comes to preserving community gardens here in the Bronx. Recently, I was part of the start of Farm School, the New York City School of Urban Agriculture, a school that is really teaching young people and elders the ins and outs of urban agriculture and growing food in the city. And the last thing, the most recent thing, is a Black Farmer Fund, getting people to understand the importance of wealth building, social capital, and communal wealth, which is very, very important.
Great stuff to hear. So I know you're a big believer in maximizing one's own power. Could you explain that and what that means?
I think a lot of us have been complacent and silent in the work that we've done. We have given up our power, especially when it comes to food, to big agricultural companies, lobbyists, politicians. And for me, when looking at community development, it's about shifting power. Now, that's very, very hard to do because power is like a drug. However, in order to change the food system, in order to change the political system, economic system in this country, we have to shift the power from people who've had power over communities of color and marginalized communities, shift it back into the hands of the people.
What would you say to the audience in terms of how they can help be part of the solution or contribute to their own communities?
I tell people time and time again, we've lost our power. We've become silent and complacent. It's time for us to get off our butts and be proactive instead of reactive. And I say that in a way because a lot of people feel it's overwhelming to try to get involved. But I try to tell people, start at a local level. Start within your neighborhood. What is it within your neighborhood that needs to change? Something as small and minuscule as adding a stop sign, because it's dangerous for kids to cross the street. Or something as what I've done in the past is turning an empty lot into a community garden. It's time for us to regain our power, folks, because time and time again we've given up that power. We have allowed others to speak for us, and we have to start making sure that the people that work for us are accountable. And so I tell people, be active. When you see injustice, call it out. Be part of the solution instead of always being part of the problem.
So, what's your view of the future? How do you engage younger individuals as part of that vision?
So the future in my vision is, when it comes to young people, is a bright future. 10 years ago we would have told me about the future of urban agriculture, sustainable agriculture and farming here in the US looks sort of dismal. But now, interacting with so many youth that understands exactly their place in the history of agriculture, being an African American growing up, my relationship to farming and growing food was slave mentality, because I felt I never fitted into the agricultural culture until I was told and I read and I researched the fact that this country was built on the backs of enslaved and indigenous people, and that we did have a part in the building this food system, and the African American experience is part of American history and experience. And a lot of young people know that now, and they want to get close to nature. They understand the relationship between food and health, and food and land is very, very important. Owning land gives you power. And so there's so many young people now who are interested in going back to the land, getting their hands back into the soil. And so for me, the future for young people, it's bright. Growing up, again, we were in isolation, everything was local. These youth of today, what? They have an empire of global leadership and connection. It spans countries. And so for me, the future of agriculture is wide open. With technology, the knowledge of technology, the savviness when it comes to social media, and the fact that these young people want to know the truth. They stand up for justice. For me, the future is bright.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Karen. Your work is truly inspirational. It's so essential, and we really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your story with us.
Thanks for having me. Bye now.
Bye bye. Well, that wraps up our second episode, and what an inspirational message to end with. TT4T brings together communities in conversation for a more sustainable tomorrow. At WM, we've long seen hope and possibility in unexpected places, and we've turned once forgotten areas into open spaces for people to learn and explore, and build community in the process. We've turned landfills into wildlife habitats around the country, and have turned open spaces into pollinator havens that contribute to the success of local community gardens. And I hope you found this conversation to be as enlightening and energizing as I did. It really reinforced the idea that the land is what we make it, and it's filled with opportunities to address an array of environmental and social issues. Learn more about what WM is doing by visiting WM.com. We'll see you next time. Thanks!